I thought I was saving my daughter from her mother, until she told the judge the truth. I spent years convinced I was the victim of a vindictive ex-wife, only to realize in a courtroom that the monster in our daughter's life was the man staring back at me in the mirror. Hey everyone, before we get into the video, don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button if you want more stories just like this. Thanks for the support. My name is David, and I am 42 years old. For the better part of a decade, I have lived with a cold, hard stone of dread in my gut, a weight that I attributed to the machinations of a woman I once loved. When my marriage to Veronica ended, it wasn't just a dissolution of a union. It felt like a declaration of war. I walked out of the courtroom on that final day of our divorce proceedings feeling like I had been gutted, stripped of my dignity, and, more importantly, stripped of my rights to be a father. Veronica had managed to secure primary physical custody, leaving me with every other weekend and a sparse scattering of holidays. I remember driving home that evening, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, promising myself that I would not let this stand. I told myself that I was the only stable thing in our daughter Lily's life, the only one who truly loved her without condition. I believed, with every fiber of my being, that Veronica was poisoning Lily against me, turning her own child into a stranger to serve her own bitter agenda. The separation was brutal, not because of the legal wrangling, but because of the slow, agonizing erosion of my relationship with Lily. In the beginning, Lily was happy to see me. She would run into my arms at the pickup point, her small body vibrating with energy, chattering about school and her friends. But as the months dragged on, the warmth began to fade. I noticed it first in the phone calls. They became shorter, filled with long, uncomfortable silences. When I asked her what was wrong, she would give me non-answers, muttering that she was tired or busy. I just knew, that Veronica was behind it. I imagined Veronica standing over the phone, glaring at Lily, feeding her lines to say, whispering lies about how I didn't care, how I had abandoned them. It was a classic case of parental alienation, a term I became obsessed with. I read forums, I talked to lawyers, I consumed every piece of literature I could find on how a mother could turn a child against a father. I saw Veronica not as an ex-wife, but as a puppet master pulling the strings of my daughter's mind. I began to document everything. Every missed call, every canceled visitation, every time Lily seemed withdrawn or hesitant, I wrote it down in a leather-bound journal I kept specifically for this purpose. I was building a case. I needed to show the court that Lily's emotional well-being was being compromised by her mother's toxicity. I remember one specific Tuesday evening when I went to pick Lily up for dinner. She came to the door wearing a hoodie pulled low over her eyes, refusing to look at me. In the car, she stared out the window, her body turned away from mine. When I tried to hold her hand, she pulled it away as if I had burned her. That night, after I dropped her back off, I sat in my car outside Veronica's house for an hour, watching the dark windows, seething with a righteous anger. I told myself that I was saving her. I told myself that Lily was a prisoner in her own home, and I was the only one fighting for her freedom. I didn't see the fear in her eyes then. I only saw the distance that I believe Veronica had put there. I was blind to anything that contradicted the narrative I had constructed in my head, a narrative where I was the hero and Veronica was the villain. This conviction hardened my resolve. I hired a private investigator, a man named Robert who promised to get me the dirt I needed. I wanted proof of Veronica's instability, proof that she was an unfit mother. Robert tailed her for weeks, documenting her comings and goings, taking photos of her grocery shopping, of her meeting friends for coffee. It was all mundane, but in my mind, I twisted it into evidence of neglect. If she was out with friends, she wasn't with Lily. If she was buying wine, she was a drunk. I was grasping at straws, but I didn't care. I was fueled by a desperate need to be right, to win. I couldn't fathom the idea that Lily might just be growing up, or that her behavior had nothing to do with her mother and everything to do with the environment I was creating. I was so focused on the war I thought I was fighting that I didn't notice the battle lines were being drawn somewhere else entirely. I was convinced I was saving my daughter, but I was actually digging a grave for my own future, one that would collapse on top of me in the most public and devastating way possible. The transition from a concerned father to a litigious aggressor happened slowly, then all at once. My lawyer, a shark of a man named Marcus, assured me that the path to full custody was paved with evidence of instability. He encouraged my narrative, validating my suspicions about Veronica and urging me to press forward. We filed a motion to modify the custody arrangement, citing emotional distress and parental alienation. I felt a surge of adrenaline when the court date was set. I truly believed that the moment I stood before the judge and presented my journal, my observations, and the truth about Veronica, the scales would tip in my favor. I imagined the judge looking at Veronica with disdain, stripping her of her rights, and handing Lily to me. In that fantasy, Lily would hug me, tears of relief streaming down her face, thanking me for saving her. It was a beautiful dream, one that I clung to like a life raft in a storm. In the weeks leading up to the hearing, the pressure in my apartment was palpable. I stopped sleeping well. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying old conversations, dissecting every interaction with Veronica, looking for ammunition. I started drinking more than usual, a glass of scotch to take the edge off, then 2, then 3. The alcohol numbed the anxiety, but it also made me volatile. I found myself snapping at coworkers, at friends, at strangers in the grocery store. I felt constantly on edge, like a coiled snake ready to strike. I saw enemies everywhere. Even Lily's silence during our visits became a personal affront, a direct attack on my ego. I stopped asking her how she was and started lecturing her on how important it was for us to be a team, how she needed to be brave and tell the judge the truth. I didn't realize I was coaching her, manipulating her just as I accused Veronica of doing. I thought I was empowering her. There was a specific incident about a month before the hearing that I should have seen as a warning sign, but I completely missed it. I had taken Lily to the park, one of our old haunts. I was pushing her on the swing, trying to recreate a memory from when she was younger. I started talking about the court case, telling her that soon she wouldn't have to be sad anymore, that she could live with me all the time. I watched her face in the reflection of the swing chain as it moved back and forth. Her expression was blank, almost terrified. When the swing slowed down, she jumped off and walked toward the bench, sitting as far away from me as possible. I asked her what was wrong, and she whispered that she just wanted to go home. The rejection stung. I felt a flash of white-hot anger, not at her, but at the situation. I stood over her, casting a shadow over her small frame, and I remember raising my voice, telling her that I was doing this for her, that she needed to stop being ungrateful. I didn't touch her, but the intensity of my outburst was terrifying. She shrunk into herself, pulling her knees to her chest, closing her eyes tight. I saw it then, or I thought I did. I saw Veronica's influence. I thought Veronica had taught her to fear my passion. I drove her home in silence, seething, convinced more than ever that Veronica had to be stopped. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep at all. I paced my apartment, reviewing my notes, practicing my opening statement. I looked at myself in the mirror, fixing my tie, looking into my own bloodshot eyes. I told the man in the mirror that he was a good father, a protector. I told him that tomorrow was the day everything would change. I felt invincible, blinded by my own self-righteousness. I didn't see the redness in my eyes, the tremor in my hands, the madness creeping in around the edges. I packed a bag for Lily, convinced that after tomorrow, she would be coming home with me. I laid out her favorite clothes, her favorite toys. I was preparing a nursery for a child that didn't need saving, she needed safety, and I was the last person on earth who could provide it. I walked out of my apartment the next morning with a sense of destiny, unaware that I was walking into a trap of my own making. The courthouse was a sprawling monolith of marble and intimidation, a place where lives were dismantled and rearranged by the stroke of a pen. I walked through the metal detectors, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I felt a surge of adrenaline, the kind that comes before a physical confrontation. I was ready for battle. I saw Veronica sitting on a wooden bench outside the courtroom, flanked by her lawyer. She looked tired, her face pale and drawn, her eyes rimmed with red. I took a moment to study her, looking for cracks in her armor. I wanted to see the monster I had created in my mind, the woman who was poisoning my child, but all I saw was a woman who looked as though she hadn't slept in a week. I interpreted her exhaustion as guilt. I told myself she was staying up late thinking of new lies to tell the judge. I walked past her without acknowledging her, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing my anger. I wanted her to feel my presence like a physical weight. We were called into the courtroom. The atmosphere was hushed and respectful, the air thick with the gravity of the decisions being made. I sat at my table, spreading out my documents like a general laying out a battle map. My lawyer whispered encouragements in my ear, telling me to stay calm, to stick to the facts, to let the evidence speak for itself. I nodded, though I felt anything but calm. My legs shook under the table, a rhythmic vibration that I couldn't control. I looked toward the back of the room, where Lily was waiting with a court-appointed guardian ad litem, a woman assigned to represent her interests in the proceeding. Lily looked small and fragile in the hard wooden chair. She was staring at her hands, twisting a tissue around her fingers. I caught her eye and smiled, trying to project warmth and reassurance. I expected her to smile back, to see the love I felt for her. Instead, she looked away quickly, turning her attention to the guardian. The rejection hit me like a punch to the gut, but I buried it deep. I told myself she was just scared, that Veronica had frightened her into silence. The proceedings began with the usual formalities. My lawyer stood up and presented our motion, outlining the allegations of parental alienation. He spoke with conviction, weaving a tale of a devoted father systematically shut out of his daughter's life by a bitter ex-wife. He cited dates, times, and specific instances of Lily's reluctance to visit, painting them as symptoms of Veronica's manipulation. I listened, nodding along, feeling a sense of vindication. It was all sounding so logical, so true. It sounded exactly like the story I had been telling myself for years. When it was Veronica's lawyer's turn to cross-examine me, I felt prepared. I answered the questions carefully, trying to maintain the image of the calm, collected victim. I admitted to being angry, but framed it as frustration at being kept from my child. I admitted to drinking, but dismissed it as a coping mechanism for the stress of the custody battle. I thought I was doing well. I thought I was winning. Then, the unexpected happened. Veronica's lawyer approached the bench and handed the judge a folder. He spoke in hushed tones, but I could hear the words psychological evaluation and concern for safety. My lawyer stiffened beside me. I leaned in, demanding to know what was happening. My lawyer whispered that they were requesting to call Lily to the stand immediately. My heart skipped a beat. This wasn't part of the plan. We were supposed to present the evidence. The judge was supposed to rule, and Lily was supposed to be spared the trauma of testifying. But the judge, looking at the contents of the folder, nodded solemnly. He agreed to hear from Lily. A chill ran down my spine. I looked over at my daughter. She stood up slowly, guided by the guardian ad litem. She walked toward the witness stand, her movements stiff and robotic. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at Veronica. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor, as if the answer to some unspeakable riddle was written there. I felt a sudden, inexplicable wave of panic. For the first time, the narrative I had constructed so carefully felt fragile, threatened by the small, silent figure walking toward the center of the room. The courtroom fell into a profound silence as Lily took the oath. Her voice was barely a whisper, a thin thread of sound that seemed to hang in the air. She promised to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I watched her hands trembling as they gripped the edge of the rail. I wanted to rush to her to wrap her in my arms and tell her it was okay, that she didn't have to do this. But I was frozen in my seat, held back by the invisible barrier of the law and the rising tide of my own fear. The judge adjusted his glasses and leaned forward, asking Lily to state her name and age for the record. She complied, her eyes still downcast. Then, Veronica's lawyer stood up. He didn't approach her aggressively. He stood near the podium, his voice soft and gentle, the way one might speak to a frightened animal. He asked her simple questions at first. How was school? Did she like her teacher? She gave one-word answers. Good. Yes. The tension in the room was suffocating. I could feel sweat trickling down my back, my shirt sticking to my skin. I looked at my lawyer, but he was staring intently at Lily, a furrow forming between his brows. Then, the lawyer asked the question I had been dreading, the one that had fueled this entire legal war. He asked Lily why she didn't want to visit her father. My breath hitched in my throat. I waited for her to repeat the lies I believed Veronica had fed her. I waited for her to say that her mom told her I was bad, that I didn't love her. But the silence stretched out, long and agonizing. Finally, Lily lifted her head. She didn't look at her mother. She didn't look at the judge. She looked directly at me. Her eyes were wide and glassy, filled with a terror that made my blood run cold. She took a shaky breath and said that she didn't want to visit because she was afraid. My mind raced to interpret this. Afraid of what? Afraid of leaving her mom? Afraid of the change? I felt a surge of anger toward Veronica for putting this fear into her head. But then Lily continued. She began to describe the bad times. She spoke of nights when I would come to pick her up, and my eyes would be funny. She said I would yell at the air, or at the car, or at things that weren't there. She described an incident at the park where I stood over her and screamed until she couldn't hear the birds anymore. I stared at her, stunned. I remembered that day. I remembered talking to her about the court case, but I certainly didn't remember screaming. I remembered raising my voice, yes, to emphasize a point, but to her in that moment, it was a roar of aggression. I felt the floor tilting beneath me. I opened my mouth to speak, to object, to tell the judge she was confused, but my lawyer placed a heavy hand on my arm, silently warning me to stay quiet. The damage was being done, and I was powerless to stop it. The narrative was shifting, slipping out of my control like water through clenched fists. But the worst was yet to come. Lily's lawyer guided her to the specific details, the things she claimed happened inside my home. She spoke of finding me in the kitchen in the middle of the night, standing in the dark, staring at the refrigerator door with a knife in my hand. She said I had turned around and looked at her, but didn't seem to know who she was. I felt a cold wash of disbelief. I had no memory of this. None. It sounded like a horror story, a fiction crafted to destroy me. I looked at Veronica, expecting to see a smirk of satisfaction, but she was crying softly into a handkerchief. Lily went on. She described how I would lock the doors when she came over, checking the locks 3 times. For times, muttering that they were coming to take her away. She said she wasn't allowed to look out the windows. The details were so specific, so visceral. I felt a dissonance screaming in my brain. These things didn't happen. I knew they didn't happen. But the certainty in Lily's voice, the raw pain in her eyes, suggested otherwise. For the first time, a seed of doubt was planted in my mind. A terrifying, impossible seed. What if I was forgetting? What if my mind was protecting me from the truth of what I had become? The air in the courtroom had grown thick, suffocatingly heavy with the weight of Lily's testimony. I sat paralyzed, a cold sweat breaking out across my forehead, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My mind was reeling, desperately trying to process the words coming from the witness stand. Every instinct I had screamed that this was a lie, an elaborate fabrication designed by Veronica to strip me of my daughter. But the details, so specific, so chillingly precise, gnawed at the edges of my certainty. I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white, my breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. My lawyer scribbled furiously on a legal pad, but he didn't look at me. I felt isolated, adrift in a sea of accusations that I didn't remember committing, but that felt devastatingly real to the only person who mattered to me. The judge looked down from his bench, his expression unreadable, but his eyes were grave. He asked Lily a few clarifying questions, his tone gentle but firm. He wanted to know how often these things happened, how they made her feel. Lily answered that she was scared all the time when she was with me. She said that she never knew which version of me would walk through the door, the dad who read her stories, or the man who yelled at the walls. The phrase "yelled at the walls" hung in the air, a chilling indictment of my mental state that I had refused to acknowledge. I remembered moments of frustration, moments where I lost my temper, but I always thought I had kept them hidden. I thought I had compartmentalized my stress, my anger, my drinking. I never realized that my daughter was watching, absorbing every outburst, every slammed door, every muttered curse. I thought I was shielding her from the ugliness of the divorce, but I had been forcing her to bathe in it. Then, the line of questioning moved toward the missing time incidents. Lily's lawyer asked her about the day she came home with a bruise on her arm. I remember that day. She had fallen off her bike. I had been the one to bandage her up, to kiss her forehead and tell her she was brave. I was proud of myself in that moment, the caring father nursing his injured child. But as Lily spoke, the memory fractured. She said she hadn't fallen off the bike. She said I had grabbed her arm to pull her away from the window because I saw a car parked outside that I didn't recognize. She said I was shaking, my eyes wild, and my grip had hurt her. She said I told her never to speak of it, that we had to keep it secret. I stared at her, my mouth agape. I remember the car. I remember the surge of paranoia, the sudden conviction that Veronica had sent someone to spy on us. But I didn't remember grabbing her. I didn't remember hurting her. My memory stopped at the fear. My brain had edited out the violence, preserving the illusion of my own decency while discarding the trauma I had inflicted. The dissonance was agonizing. I felt as though I were living in two realities simultaneously. In one, I was David, the loving father fighting for custody against a cruel ex-wife. In the other, I was a monster, a terrifying presence who haunted his daughter's nightmares. Which one was true? I looked down my hands. They were shaking. I tried to steady them, but I couldn't. I thought about the scotch bottles I emptied, the blackouts I dismissed as simple exhaustion, the mornings I woke up with a splitting headache and no clear memory of the night before. The gaps in my memory, once convenient voids, now seemed gaping chasms filled with potential horrors. I thought about the arguments with Veronica, the ones where she pleaded with me to get help, the ones where she looked at me with genuine fear in her eyes. I had called her dramatic. I had called her a liar. But what if she was the only one telling the truth? The defense attorney rested his questioning, and the silence returned, heavier than before. My lawyer stood up, but his demeanor had changed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a somber hesitation. He asked Lily a few routine questions, tried to establish that I loved her, that I provided for her, but his heart wasn't in it. It was a hollow performance. He knew as well as I did that the damage was irreversible. Lily answered his questions politely, but she never wavered. She never took back her statements. She never looked at me with anything but fear. As she stepped down from the stand, I wanted to run to her, to drop to my knees and beg for her forgiveness, but my body was leaden. I was rooted to the spot, a prisoner of my own denial, watching the destruction of my life unfold in slow motion. The judge called for a recess, giving us all a moment to breathe. But the air in the room had become toxic. I sat there, alone with my thoughts, as the reality of my situation began to close in around me like a darkening sky before a storm. The recess was a blur of muted conversations and hushed whispers. I sat motionless at the defense table, staring at the grain of the wood, unable to process the chaotic storm of thoughts raging in my mind. My lawyer had walked away to speak with Veronica's counsel, leaving me isolated in my humiliation. I could feel the eyes of the court staff, the bailiffs, even the cleaning crew, stealing glances at me. To them, I was no longer the aggrieved father fighting for his rights. I was the man who had terrified his own daughter. The label clung to me like a foul smell. I felt a desperate need to escape, to run out of the courthouse and keep running until I couldn't breathe. But I knew there was nowhere to go. I had to face the verdict. I had to face the music of a life I had conducted so badly. When we returned to the courtroom, the mood had shifted from anticipation to a somber finality. The judge took his seat, shuffling the papers before him. He looked tired, his face etched with the weight of the decision he was about to render. He spoke clearly and without emotion, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. He began by acknowledging the difficulties of custody battles, the way emotions can cloud judgment and distort reality. But as he continued, it became clear that he was not buying the narrative of parental alienation. He spoke of the consistency and detail in Lily's testimony, noting the lack of coaching in her demeanor. He pointed out that the specific incidents she described, the locks, the yelling at unseen threats, the bruise, the knife in the kitchen, formed a coherent picture of instability and fear. He said that while parental alienation was a serious issue, it could not be used as a shield to deflect legitimate concerns about a child's safety. I listened, my heart sinking with every word. The judge recounted the psychological report that had been submitted earlier, the one I hadn't paid enough attention to. The report suggested that Lily's anxiety was not caused by her mother's influence, but by direct experiences in my presence. It mentioned that I exhibited signs of paranoia and potential alcohol abuse that created an unpredictable environment. I remember the evaluation. I had breezed through it, answering the questions with what I thought were the right answers. I thought I had fooled the psychologist, but I hadn't. The report saw through the mask. The judge said that the court's primary concern was the best interest of the child, and that in this case, the best interest of Lily was to maintain the status quo of primary custody with her mother, with supervised visitation for me. The words hung in the air, supervised visitation. It was a death sentence for my role as a father. The formal stripping of my rights followed in a bureaucratic blur. The judge terminated my request for full custody, effectively barring me from having Lily alone. He ordered me to attend anger management classes and substance abuse counseling before any petition for unsupervised visitation could be considered. I heard the rulings, but they felt distant, as if they were happening to someone else. I looked over at Veronica. She was crying, but she looked relieved. The tension that had held her shoulders tight for months seemed to release. She had won, but more than that, she had been validated. The court had seen what I had refused to see. She wasn't a monster trying to hurt me. She was a mother trying to protect her child from me. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I wasn't the hero of this story. I was the villain. I had spent years fighting a war against a phantom, all while the real enemy was staring back at me in the mirror every morning. As the gavel banged, signaling the end of the hearing, I stood up slowly. My legs felt weak, as if they might give way at any moment. I gathered my papers, my hands trembling uncontrollably. I looked toward the back of the room one last time. Lily was gone, already whisked away by Veronica and the guardian ad litem. I didn't blame her. I wouldn't want to see me either. I walked out of the courtroom, flanked by my lawyer who was already packing his briefcase and preparing his exit strategy. The hallway was bright and bustling, but I moved through it like a ghost. People brushed past me, living their lives, unaware of the cataclysm that had just occurred inside room 402. I felt a profound sense of emptiness, a void where my purpose used to be. I had fought for my daughter with everything I had, and in doing so, I had destroyed the very relationship I was trying to save. I walked out into the sunlight, the irony of the beautiful day lost on me. I was free to go, but I had nowhere left to go. The days following the hearing were a haze of self-loathing and stark, terrifying clarity. The court had mandated counseling, a requirement I initially resented but soon came to view as a lifeline. I spent hours sitting on a leather couch in a small, dimly lit office, dissecting my life with a stranger who held a mirror up to my soul. It was brutal. I had to confront the alcoholism that I had masked as social drinking or stress relief. I had to confront the rage that simmered just beneath the surface, ready to explode at the slightest provocation. But most importantly, I had to confront the memory lapses. Under the guidance of the therapist, I began to piece together the missing chunks of time. It wasn't easy. There were sessions where I screamed, sessions where I denied everything, and sessions where I wept until I was physically sick. But slowly, the fog lifted. I remember the knife in the kitchen. I remembered grabbing Lily's arm. I remembered the screaming matches with Veronica that I had rewritten in my head as calm discussions. The truth was ugly, and it was entirely mine. I realized that I had been suffering from a form of dissociation, a psychological coping mechanism where my mind would shut down during periods of extreme stress or intoxication. When Lily described me yelling at the air or staring at nothing. She wasn't lying. She was describing me checking out, replaced by a volatile, unpredictable shell. I had been living in a state of denial so deep that I had created a false reality to survive it. I wasn't saving Lily from Veronica. I was trying to save myself from the crushing weight of my own failures. I had projected my guilt onto Veronica, making her the villain so I wouldn't have to look at the villain in the mirror. It was a cruel twist of fate, a cosmic joke played at the expense of my daughter's childhood. The realization was devastating, but it was also the first step toward redemption, though redemption felt like a distant, unattainable star. I haven't seen Lily since the courtroom. Veronica filed for a restraining order shortly after, citing the testimony and the therapist's initial findings, and the judge granted it without hesitation. I didn't fight it. I couldn't. I knew now that my presence in her life was a source of fear, not love. I see photos of her occasionally, posted by mutual friends on social media, always kept at a distance, always out of reach. She looks older, happier. The haunted look is gone from her eyes, replaced by the carefree expression of a child who feels safe. It breaks my heart every time I see her face, but it also gives me a strange sense of peace. She is safe. That was always the goal, wasn't it? I just never imagined that safety would mean my absence. I live a quieter life now. I don't drink. I go to my meetings. I work a simple job that doesn't demand the high-stress intensity of my previous career. I am learning to live with the guilt, to carry it without letting it drown me. Some days are harder than others. There are nights when I wake up in a cold sweat, the phantom sensation of a knife in my hand, or the sound of Lily's terrified voice echoing in my ears. But I don't run from the memories anymore. I sit with them. I acknowledge them. I accept that I am the man who hurt his daughter, the man who let his own demons destroy the thing he loved most. The story I thought I was living, the one where I was the savior, was a lie. The real story is a tragedy, a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ego and the devastating power of self-deception. I thought I was saving my daughter from her mother, but the judge, and ultimately Lily herself, showed me the truth. I wasn't the hero of her story. I was the villain she had to survive. And now, all I can do is stay away and hope that somewhere, in the quiet moments between her memories, she find a way to forgive me for a father I didn't even know I was